Hi, good evening. Welcome to yet another episode of Unsuited. We're on episode number 7, season 1, and our very spirited guest today has had a very astounding legal career across various geographies and industries. Today, hear her talk about being a student, a mother, a daughter, but above all, just being a human being. Please welcome Mamta Sundaran. Mamta, hi, you can turn on your camera.
Hi, Tanisha.
Hi. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, Mamta.
Hi, Vikas.
Great. So we've been looking forward to this for a while, actually. I know it's been hard to pin you down. We're delighted to have you on board Unsuited. So this is very much, we deep dive into the kind of the non-technical side of the lawyer. So really getting to know lawyers as human beings, because there are a few that are definitely human beings out there.
Not sharks.
So we're going to go back a few years, and back to your grandparents' period in the 40s. And you come from a family that served in the forces, grandfathers who went to prison as freedom fighters, and a grandmother who was a child widow and then remarried, and overall a family that really set social reforms into play. So, with how they lived their lives, incredible stories that you've been telling us, recently. So, how did these stories, and you interacting with your grandparents when you were young, kind of impact and influence, your whole kind of way of looking at life?
It's a very big question because it's basically asking me to explain my entire life and personality, I suppose, but I will try and keep it not very long. So I guess my mother's side of the family is perhaps the one that has influenced me more than my dad's side. They were very poor, in fact, and didn't probably have money for education either. But they realized that education was the only way to better their lot in life. So there was a significant focus on education for all of them. They all went on to do jobs, some good jobs, some, I guess, medium average type jobs. But for the most part, I think for all of them, the prevailing the one key principle was integrity, and to make sure that you worked to the best of your ability. So no shirking hard work. And I have learned that from them. I've seen it in my father, I've seen it in my mother, to do a desire to do your absolute best, no matter what circumstances are, to study really hard and do your best again, I suppose. Integrity has been a big one. Most of my relatives, including my dad, were public servants, and as public servants, it was a big thing for them to be able to establish at the end of the day that they were in it for service and they were not actually going to make any personal benefit out of it. So I've heard also stories about how when my dad was a junior Air Force officer when we were growing up, and my sister, who's older than me, was a baby, my mother used to get really worried when halfway of the month went by, because she was like, we need to buy a box of formula. We've got no money. How's this going to work? So It's interesting. I think we've grown up seeing that life improves, I suppose, for every generation. So in that sense, it's not as tight anymore. But, you've grown up seeing the value for money, the value for education, the need to do your best, integrity first and foremost. And I think more importantly for me, a real deep-rooted willingness to question why something is done a particular way, because I've seen that through my family. As you mentioned, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, is a child widow, and she remarried my maternal grandfather, I suppose. She was also about 8 years older than him. So not only was she a widow who was getting remarried, my grandfather was marrying somebody much older than him. And at the time that all of this happened, mid-40s, as you said, it was pretty rare, but it was at the height of the social reform movement along with the independence struggle. So a lot of people in that side of the family were very committed to doing the right thing. And I think that really has kind of flowed through the line for all of us, my sister, me, my parents. So I think significant influence, if I can say that.
Yeah, it must be. I mean, that's very kind of unique kind of experiences that you've had, and it would have had a incredible shaping of who you are today as well. So how did you go about then from having that kind of strong, and it's pretty quite, you said you grew up in Bangalore, and it's quite also, while social reform was part of the dynamic, also quite conservative as well. So how did you go from that into suddenly deciding to go to law school, for example?
Well, I wish I could say it was a very thought through, deliberate choice, and I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but that is not true. I think I kind of slipped into becoming a lawyer. I finished my schooling. My dad was in the Air Force, so we moved around everywhere. So when I finished my schooling, my dad had asked me to write this entrance exam for law, and I thought, oh, whatever, because my aunt used to stay very close to the university. And at that time, National Law School wasn't very well known. So my dad said, she's close by, just write the exam, she'll be your local guardian or whatever. And I thought, seriously, I don't know about law. But I wrote the exam. I didn't even finish the paper. And I thought, okay, that's done. I want to do eco-honors. I find economics interesting. But funnily enough, a month and a half later, suddenly we got a letter from the college saying you got admission. And I remember thinking, I didn't even finish the paper. They've given me admission. What kind of a college is that? Should not look a gift horse in the mouth, should you? Anyway, my dad had gone off to Russia at the time, actually, because he was doing one of the courses on the MIGs. He's trained on the MIGs. He's an electrical engineer. So he wasn't there, and we had to suddenly cough up this admission money and do all of this. And I remember my mother was in a complete dizzy. She was like, oh my God, what should we do? So in the days when there was no telephone at home, we had to make a call to my dad and say, this has come through. What do you think? What do we think? A decision was arrived at, and then college happened. So I suppose once I got admission, I didn't have the heart to say no, because I wasn't sure if I'd get admission in a great college for eco-honors. So I thought, oh, one bird in hand is better than two in the bush. Let's just take it. Here I am. I guess.
Wow. Okay.
The universe looks after the fools, I suppose. They have certainly looked after me.
And then obviously it would have been a very different environment from National Law School to being growing up in a kind of more conservative place in Bangalore. So what aspects did you enjoy about studying law at the National Law School? And what aspects were not as enjoyable and you wish you didn't have to deal with?
So I studied, most of my school was actually central schools, Kendriya Vidyalayas, and you may know that they have been set up originally by the government to help people with transferable jobs like my dad, people in the banks, public sector, undertakings, defense, because your school kept changing, because your house kept changing. And basically the thinking was to have a common syllabus and curriculum across and a common way of teaching, so that the student's experience doesn't change and you don't get disadvantaged because you're moving every so often. So we were brought up, we studied in a central school. To this day, my father tells me that he has spent more on my law college than he has on all of my schooling put together, because our fees was 5 rupees a quarter or something. So it was obviously much subsidized education. And the education also was, I guess the quality was intermittent. Some schools were great, some schools were not so great. So it's not as if you could choose. And typically they would give you admission in whatever school was close to your residence. Oh, and there's a funny story about this. There's a school in Delhi, it's RK Puram, Sector 8. And it was at that time when I was in, I don't know, 9th, I think. It had a reputation as being one of the best central schools in Delhi. So my dad had decided he wants to get us admission in that school, me and my sister. We, of course, used to live in Noida because the Air Force didn't have enough quarters to give you an apartment as soon as you landed in Delhi. You had to kind of wait for 2 years or something before you got allotted something. So we were very far away. My dad went to the lady, the principal, her name was Mrs. John, and said, please get admission to my girls. And Mrs. John said, I really wish I could help you, but you're outside our residential zone. I can't help you. So my dad said, oh, okay. He went again the next day, and then he went again the next day, and he went for 30 days running, one after the other, same time. He kept asking the same question. Finally, on the last day, Mrs. John said to him, Mr. Ramasundara, today is my retirement day. I'm going to do you one favor before I leave. And she gave us admission. So that's kind of how we joined that school. So it's a very different world. And then, of course, we came to law school, and I came to law school, and it was a bit like, woo, culture shock. What just happened here? Because it was a small place with the first year to the fifth year together, obviously. But the people were very different. And it was interesting. I mean, for all the fact that there was diversity even in central schools, not everyone was a defense officer's kid, for example, right? But I think the way of thinking was not all that open. You didn't really, for example, I remember I came to college and I thought, oh my God, there are homosexual people out there. Oh my God, people think differently. There's something called, these different ways of thinking. What do you mean? They're breaking something down. What's critical legal study? So there's this whole new world of thinking that just opened out for me. And my biggest learning from NLS, and I'm very grateful for it, has just been, this desire and willingness to just be open to difference and embrace it. I absolutely loved that there was so much to learn, that there were so many different people, and everyone had a point of view, and everyone was quite vocal. So it was a bit like, oh, okay, then you think differently. Oh, you have another different point of view. So it was really quite nice. But what I didn't like also, I think, was a bit of the same, which is that it was a small place. Everybody was kind of locked into a small place. And I suppose the thing with people is it's very hard to keep from talking about other people all the time. And that is not my scene. I find that really quite annoying and frustrating. So I found that really frustrating, because necessarily then it leads to judgment. Then you say what kind of people they are. Then you say all sorts of nonsense. So that if I could have done away with that, it would have been a great 5 years. But it was, I think for me, it was just an expansion of my mental horizon. It was just like, there is a world out there. Wow. And I think it helped me to build a personality. I had no personality before that, because we were from the old world where, you did what your parents told you, and you had a little bit of fear about your parents as well. And then you suddenly come to law school and you're seeing kids who really are not afraid of their parents. They have a point of view and a personality, and you're thinking, oh, I should build a personality of my own. This is my chance. So I guess that's kind of where it all started. So who I am today is also thanks in large part to NLS, I suppose.
Oh, wow. And this was what, in the mid-90s, was it?
This was in the mid-90s, yeah.
Okay. Wow. And that's also when it was like opening up, liberalization, so a whole kind of different mindset that was coming through in youngsters then.
It was very different. I mean, Bangalore was still conservative as a place, I suppose, where the university was, but the university was like a little village in a bigger village of Nagapavi. And in this little village, there was still the conservative view of a small world, but there was so much difference of thought and opinion and personality and point of view that it was really, I think it was for me, it was a catalyst for my mind opening out and my personality starting to develop. It was great from that perspective.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
I think that's great feedback for Sudhir as well. We had Sudhir on last week. So I think for him and he was probably at the college at the same time as you, actually.
He was, but honestly, who knows what the college is like today? And frankly, maybe I'm the only person, maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe other people did not have the same experience. So personally, it is what it is, and you move on.
Yeah, but he's also had similar thing about it's really there to expand your mind and that kind of level of growth that you showed.
I think so, and I think you got to be grateful for your good experiences. And if I'm honest, you have to let go of the negative ones, because if you stick to them, I think it causes you more harm. Doesn't really change anything. So, gotta move on.
Yeah. I wish my kids would be a bit old school as well right now. I've got a 12 and 9-year-old, and I'm like, oh my God, like getting them to listen is incredible.
Oh, thank you. I was thinking it's just me with my 6-year-old, but obviously everyone has the same problem. Very happy to have company.
So the next question really, Mamta, is, so law school happened. Then you went off and I think worked at a law firm for a short while. Before, at a very young age, you were offered a role in a foreign jurisdiction as an in-house counsel. And then you kind of spent a fair amount of time overseas. And I think some of our most well-known general counsels in India today may not have had that kind of opportunity early on or even much later in their careers, right? So you must have worked with such diverse nationalities and, seen such different work culture, because I think you were in India, then Singapore, then London. So you've pretty much, and you've also worked across jurisdictions like Malaysia, Indonesia, which were the then developing Southeast Asian countries. Can you tell us a little bit about culturally, what your experiences were like?
Sure. This is the time when outsourcing was quite new to the world and it had just begun. And I was working with JSA in Bangalore. I was having a great time, learning a hell of a lot with the people that I was working with. And I remember at the time, I thought I was made this British Telecom at the time had won their first outsourcing contract with Unilever. And it was a telecom outsourcing contract. And basically, BT was to take over the telecom assets, people, and contracts of Unilever and run it for them. So you think that's quite straightforward, but actually it's quite complicated because it's never been done before. And I think for BT, obviously Unilever existed in more jurisdictions than BT did. So they had to kind of get their heads around the different jurisdictions that were also new to them. So BT came to JSA because I think JSA had helped them set up their office in India. And they came to JSA and said, can you give us someone who can help us figure this out for Southeast Asia? And they said Southeast Asia, but it was basically, it was the Indian subcontinent. So it was India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And So I guess luckily for me, and I have to say it was very lucky, I turned out to be the person who was given to them. Now, I don't know what their experience of me was. I'm hoping positive because they did offer me a job eventually. But I remember starting, on day one, I was given this fat book and said, read that. And this book was basically, now we are very familiar with this whole contract book concept. When your outsourcing contract is negotiated, you do this fat you do this fat book that has all the contracts and all the relevant schedules and things in it. And then, of course, they said, read it and get your head around it. And I thought, what? There's some 500 pages. So like one little champu, I sat and read through everything. But of course, you don't remember stuff until you start to apply it. And what I remember from that job and from that experience of a year and a half was the privilege and I guess the opportunity to go to Sri Lanka and work with people there. And this was just before the cyclone, actually. The opportunity to go to Bangladesh, where for the first time, it just made sense when you said, ye 2 take ka insaan hai, because, they have a 2 taka note and you're going, wow, that's amazing. And then going to Pakistan, and I could not get over the fact that I was in Pakistan. And I have Pakistani friends from my time in that contract. They're so nice. They are just so nice. It's just like, and you've probably, anyone who's been to Pakistan or met a Pakistani person will say the same, which is that they're remarkably nice, very welcome, very warm, very hospitable, and genuinely feel like, we are all part of the same fabric, so to speak, and that politics is the one that's divided us. So actually visited Pakistan, struck it off my bucket list thinking I'm never going to go again. So this is my chance to see everything. Unfortunately, I could not go to Takshashila and Nalanda, which I regret to this day. But, saw quite a bit, went to Lahore, went to Islamabad, went to Karachi. It was great. I had a great time. And then when they offered me the job, I thought it's in Singapore. For personal reasons, it seemed like the right thing for me at the time. And I thought, let's just see, I'll take it. And I actually didn't know anyone in Singapore at the time, no family, no friends. I thought, how hard can it be? I'll just go. So I went. Of course, famous last words. I'm always doing this. I have this polarity of dissatisfaction with the present, with the current status quo, always on the one hand. And on the other hand, the need to be comfortable. I want them both, but they both can't happen. So I'm inevitably living in the state of polarity where I'm thinking, why did I do this? Anyway, so I went to Singapore, and for the first 2 years, I basically did not see the light of day except when I came into work, because I was working really long hours, and I loved it, I have to say. I loved the fact that it was a technology company and that you had to learn about the technology, because I'm not someone who's particularly science focused or particularly interested in technology. So for me, it was again like another world opened out, huge learning opportunity. And the people were amazing. I was actually hired to report into a lady who was on mat leave at the time. She came back about 9 months or 10 months after I went, I think. So for the first year, I was pretty much operating on my own. There was no handover. I knew nothing about the business of PT, and I had to just figure it all out. And I thought, this is great. I love it. So after a few months of a very hard time, I think the cultural learnings for me were, Singapore is a great country. It has a lot of stuff going for it. I remember I was once out on a walk with a friend, and I could see a family, parents and 2 children walking in front, and the children just turned the corner, and the parents were quite nonchalant about it, continuing to have their conversation. And my friend and I were like, the kids have turned the corner. Oh my God, what's going on? And, it became to the conclusion that it's a very safe place. In India, your kids turn a corner, you would turn quite quickly to make sure you kind of keep eye contact on them and you know where they are. But Singapore is not like that. Singapore is great, I suppose. The year I arrived was the year when the government said we have too much money in our treasury, so we are giving cash back to people. I fell off my chair when I heard. I had to ask questions. What do you mean they're giving cash? Why are they giving cash back? This doesn't make any sense. So it's a country that works. It's a country that really works, but it's a bubble. It's a bubble where everything is perfect inside, but that isn't the real world. And I caught myself thinking quite often, when I go back to the real world, it won't be like this, so don't get used to it, sort of thing. But Singaporeans, very welcoming as a culture, I think, but they're slightly reserved because it's a very expat concentrated country. So I think they want to wait and watch to see whether you're going to be there for a while before they make the decision to invest time in you. And as someone, I think, who's moved many countries, I've realized that there's a gestation period before which you break through into a social circle, right? And for me, that's 2 to 3 years. But by the time I broke through the social circle in Singapore, it was The best time ever. Stars aligned. Universe doing me a favor, I suppose. We had a great bunch of people in BT that we worked with. So we were a gang of about 8 to 10 people. I used to hang out, go out every evening. It was superb. And it was actually very diverse mix of people. There were some Scottish people, there were some Irish people, there was native Singaporean Indian, a native Singaporean Chinese, Australian Chinese people. So it was a great, great mix of people. And I think, again, opened my eyes out to the world out there. Culturally, I think for me, every pocket of Southeast Asia is different and the people are quite different. So you got to know a little bit of the conflict that's somewhat subterranean between Singapore and Malaysia, and how Singapore felt really betrayed by the fact that actually Malaysia had abandoned them and they had to set up as their own country. You don't realize that until someone tells you. The Thai people, so nice, so polite, so wanting to please you and say what you think and say what they think you want to hear. That it takes you a while to figure out. They're only repeating it because they think you want to hear it, not because that's what they think. You need to get your head around that and figure out it through. So very interesting. I think for me, the biggest learning was how to be an in-house counsel and how to understand the product you sold. I remember technical conversations with people. We used to have a bidding group. And people from the technical design team, the service design team, people who did quality, all of them would come together, the finance guys, the lawyers, talk about the solution that was being sold. And it's only when you understood it that you could then figure out what terms and conditions you could put around it, or you cannot mitigate risk. So big learning for me, I think, on really understanding what you sell, what the company does, and the more questions you ask. I mean, I think I was the only person who went to the engineers and said, okay, so tell me about this. They were like, oh, Bakra, this is great. Sit down. We'll tell you everything. So many different high moments. But yeah.
Did you learn any languages?
I went to a Mandarin class for a week. I went with this Irish friend of mine, and we were so committed. You can see how committed, because we only lasted 1 week. But we were so committed. We went to this class, and she was having a lot of trouble because Mandarin is a tonal language. So the same thing said in a different tone has a different meaning.
Okay.
As are Thai and Vietnamese, and they're even more complex than Mandarin. So the teacher would say something, and you thought you heard it, and you tried to reproduce the sound, and he goes, no, not like that. So I got to the point where I would say to the teacher, can you just open your mouth and show me what you're doing so I can make the same sound? And I think it was helpful. I had Hindi, so I could write down in Hindi what it sounded like.
Correct.
The Irish girl was just like, I don't understand what he's saying. What is he saying? How's that sound coming out? Which is very interesting. My sister studies, she's an audiologist and speech pathologist. And one of the things she does, she works with babies. Her research is about how babies perceive speech and how is speech perception impacted by whether you're from a monolingual family or a bilingual family or a multilingual family, right? So to give it a very easy example, a Japanese baby, when it's born, assuming it can hear properly, can hear the difference between R and L. But at some point, and fairly early, they will tune out the R, because Japanese does not have R, it only has an L. So if it's a monolingual Japanese speaking household, this child will not be able to hear the difference between R and L. And that's true. I worked with a Japanese person in BT, and I kept trying to get her to say rock. And she would say, yeah, I get it. And she would say lock. So it was very interesting. It is true. It actually works like this. So,
but you're right. That's true about Bengali as well. I have a good friend who's Bengali, and she can't say ladka ladki. She says larka larki. so yeah, I've seen that a little bit. So language, yeah, you tried learning Mandarin, but and how about food? Did you go pick up any new cuisine, like actually cook it yourself?
No. So I have to confess that unfortunately I'm not a huge Asian food fan. I also went to Singapore at a time when I think it was still relatively less, well, not as cosmopolitan, I suppose, as it is today. So the concept of vegetarian food was a bit like, what do you mean, vegetarian food? And they would be like, yeah, just remove the meat and eat the rest. I'm going, yeah, but it's fish sauce. No, but I don't want fish sauce. Oh, then you can't eat anything. So there were occasions when I ended up eating plain rice. So it got better. Obviously, once your friends start to realize that it matters to you and you are careful, then they start to choose the right places where the option exists. But Singapore is so famous for its crab. I've gone to so many crab parties and I've just looked at the crab, and a part of me thinks maybe I should have just tried it. But then I'm like, nah, not my thing. So I did not, unfortunately, adopt any of the food, I have to say. I like actually Malay cuisine a lot.
Okay.
Malay is amazing cuisine.
And they have a lot of vegetarian options also, interestingly. They do. That desserts are superb. Their food is good as well. Yeah. Okay. It's spicy. It's got like a nice flavor.
Super. And how about your stint in London? What kind of, what culturally did you pick up there? Whether language, food, understanding work style and ethic?
So I went to London also not knowing anybody. This seems to be a common theme with me.
Did you go straight from Singapore to London?
I did. Yeah, but it's a funny story. Maybe I'll digress for a minute and explain how I got there. So I had done about 4 years in BT by then, and I was starting to get itchy feet. Air Force officer's kid. I was just like, oh, it's 4 years. I should be doing something different. Come on. I'm gathering too much moss. And as it happened, I was out on a Friday evening with a friend at Clark Quay having a beer. And I get a phone call from some number, I don't recognize it. And it's a recruiter saying, are you interested in joining Diageo? And I remember saying, who's Diageo? Because it is now that as a company, we have a reputation, but until then it was about our brands. So you knew Johnny Walker, you knew Guinness, but you didn't really know that it belonged to Diageo. So the gentleman said, they make alcohol. And I thought, oh, yes, of course I want to work for an alcohol company. And I went for the interview, and they were looking for someone in a senior position for their business in Asia Pacific. And the then Asia Pacific General Counsel interviewed me, and she came back to me after the interview and said, I think you're great. I think you would be a super fit culturally for Diageo, but I can't give you this job. And I thought, oh. And she said, you don't know anything about alcohol. You don't know anything about Diageo. Why don't I hire you and send you to a developed market for Diageo? Learn about Diageo, learn about alcohol, make your contacts and come back to APAC. And I thought, seriously, Annabelle, you've met me for an hour. This is not going to happen. 9 months later, I got a call saying, do you want to go to Amsterdam or do you want to go to London? And I thought, London? I'm going to London. So she basically hired me for a job that they created and made me report to some guy who had never met me before. But he was remarkably nice. I just arrived one day and said, hi, Michael, I'm reporting to you. And he was like, oh, hi, Mamta. So it was a very interesting experience. But I've realized since that Diageo has taken many bets on talent that have worked out. But anyway, London was another eye-opening experience for me. It is so cosmopolitan. The number of languages you hear, even as you're walking on the road, and I think for me, that was the real one. Because even in Singapore, you hear a lot of different languages, but they are South Asian languages for the most part. But here, I couldn't even tell what language I was hearing after a point. There were so many different ones. And I was just like, wow, here is this giant city that can accommodate so many people, and everyone finds a life, everyone finds work, fulfillment, I suppose, and joy. It was quite something. Professionally, for me, I think Diageo in the UK for many years has been a company that every graduate wants to join. So pretty much it is your first choice of a company role, if that's where you're going, right? So everyone in the business, everyone in the legal team was really smart. And for the first time in my life, I thought, this is great. This is great. Everyone here is smarter than I am. I can learn something from everybody. So I remember thinking at the time, and this sounds arrogant, but it's not meant to be. I remember thinking at the time that, you really have to try to get to a point where you can establish the value that you bring. Interestingly, for the first 3 months, I didn't have too much work because it was a newly created role and the business had no idea what to do with me. They were like, okay, we have a dedicated lawyer. What does that mean? So after 3 months of sitting around, I thought, this is kind of getting old. Let me do something about this. By the time I left, which was a year and 10 months later, I had more work than me and another person could handle. So I've come to the conclusion that I am a workaholic and I can create work where none exists. And all of it, I choose to think in retrospect, was value-adding work. But it was a great experience. It was a huge experience because I was supporting the European procurement part of the business. And we ended up, we were doing commodity transactions, price fixing future contracts. We were buying things like grain, and suddenly you say, what am I buying the grain for? And then you start to realize you're buying it to make the vodka, you're buying it to make the gin. Then the contracts that you have with cooperatives and the farmers in Scotland, because you want their barley to make your whiskey. So it was very interesting. I learned a hell of a lot. But professionally, it was very challenging, huge learning for me. And I think all the people, from everything that I've learned in those 2 years, the thing that stands out for me the most is really this whole philosophy about leadership. It's not just enough to be an expert, a subject matter expert, and great at what you do. That is required. But what is necessary, and that's Diageo's perspective of life anyway, is that you need to be a leader. And to be a leader, you need to transition from being a subject matter expert to being someone who is actually a leader in the business. So someone who's not a lawyer or someone who does not work with you on a transaction should still be able to see you as a leader in this business. And how can you make that transition? And there's a lot of focus around leadership development. I absolutely love that. And to this day, actually, Diageo does it. I think it's a huge plus, and I have developed immensely, I think, because of it. So professionally, huge learning. Again, I think every role has characterized, for me, huge learning, which is why I've chosen it.
Wow. When was it? What kind of period was this? Was this like 2006, 7, 8?
This was 2004 to 2010. That's when I finished my stint in London and came back to India.
So 2004-10, you were with Diageo in London?
No, first BD and then 2 years with Diageo.
And okay, and then when did you actually start your career? Because this is very early that you're suddenly doing these big leaps.
So I started my career. I guess I passed out for I graduated. That's better. I graduated in.
Passed out is a great one for a Diageo person.
For a spirited woman such as me.
They must have. If you ever say that within, when you went to London, I passed out. They're like, yes, we're hiring you.
So I graduated in 99. I went to BT in Singapore in 2004, I think. And I joined Diageo Jan 2009, and December 2010 I came back to Diageo India in Bombay.
Okay, that is quick transition for a local lawyer to be going international so quickly, in their career actually.
Very lucky. Stars have been lined up. Someone's watching out for the food. I told you.
Came back in 2010, and you obviously came back to an India that was probably very different than the one you left, right? Because a lot must have happened in those 6 years, especially since India was anyway on that upward rise in terms of our FDI policies undergoing change, different kinds of investments happening into the country. Like Vikas said, liberalization, which began, of course, in the early 90s, now further catching up. So what was that like to come back to India after, being away that long? What were the changes you saw really?
I think I underestimated it. I mean, I knew going to Singapore was going to be very different, and so I was mentally prepared for it. I also knew going to London was going to be very different, so I was mentally prepared for it. And my sister said to me, going to Bombay, it's going to be very different. Be mentally prepared. And I thought, going back to India, come on, I'm going home. How big? What a big deal. Actually, I've never lived in Bombay before. And I think for people who have not lived in Bombay, or at least I felt it that way, the disparity in income distribution, and it just stares in your face. It is very difficult to see. It is very difficult to see as an everyday spectacle. I found that incredibly hard, and it was a very different world, and the company was very different, and it was the first time that I had taken on a true leadership role. So I was a part of the management team of the business. And for someone like me, it was a difficult transition because I am usually on the side of the underdog or the employee. So to see myself on the other side for a change was like, am I being true to myself? Is this really what I want to do with my life? Is it going to need a personality transplant to do well at this job? In which case, I don't really want to do this job, which is weird. It's not like I have the best personality on the planet, so I can't change it. But I guess we like our clothes, we like our personalities, we like our hair, all that crap. Right? So I remember I had a very hard time actually adjusting. But I think from a legal profession perspective, there were two standout differences in my mind. The first one was when I left, actually choosing a career in in-house was still quite rare for people. It was considered that you were stepping down in some way as a legal professional because you were really only a good lawyer if you proved yourself in court or if you proved yourself in a law firm and you climbed the ladder, you made a partner, etc. I mean, it didn't bother me at the time because it was right for me, so I did it. But that perception had really changed. I think more and more people were choosing in-house, and it was not seen to be a stigma anymore. It was seen to be a perfectly acceptable choice, and all sorts of decent lawyers do it, right? So sometimes I think there was still a bit of that, oh, you're taking your foot off the pedal a little bit, are you? Going in-house kind of thing. But it was way better than it was when I left.
Okay.
And the second thing that stood out in my mind was, at the time I left, you had these really big law firms that were very well known, been around for a very long time. But by the time I came back, there were so many more law firms and so many people had set up and started independently. The industry was booming, and obviously there is enough space, and even now continues to be enough space for anyone who's competent to set up and do well. So collaboration in some sense and cooperation really just increases the value of the market and the industry. There is no need to be this competitive. I mean, there is enough for everyone. So I think that was a bit of an eye-opener for me, like, oh, wow, everyone is doing quite okay. I mean, maybe everyone's not buying like a, I don't know, really expensive imported car every day, but they're fine. So that was an eye-opener for me.
Like you're saying, yes.
It's not for everyone.
Correct. Understood.
You mentioned a point that even when you were at BT and then Diageo, that it's really important to understand the product you sell and understand the business, which forget about for GC to say that, even though I know many sales guys that don't even understand their product, right? So how can, and that's still alien language to GCs and lawyers today. It's not a common kind of understanding. So how did you get to that kind of thinking and rationale that, it's really important for you as a lawyer and a GC to understand the business and how to sell?
I mean, I have to say it was not like a major epiphany. It is a bit of a no-brainer, I feel. If you think, firstly, I don't know which sales guys you know, because every sales guy I know knows what he or she is selling. But anyway, think about this. We are not a lawyer in a company is not an island independent of everything. I mean, he or she is not sitting at a desk and someone comes and asks them a legal question for which an answer is required. That never happens. Somebody comes to you and says, I have this business problem. I'm stuck. What shall I do? And you can't then respond and say, why don't you break that down to the legal issue and then come back to me? And you'd be out, you'd be looking for a job fairly quickly, right? So your job then is to break down that business problem. And I think get to the bottom line, as Zia called it, what is the real issue here? And you can't break it down unless you ask the right questions. And to ask the right questions, you need to know how the business works, how the industry operates. To this day, and I have now spent a very long time in alcohol. What is it, 10 years? 10 years? Yeah, sheesh. I need to move on. I've been for 10 years in Diageo. I keep telling my boss. But anyway, after 10 years in alcohol, you think you probably know everything you need to know about how the business works or the industry works, but that's not true. Even today, if a problem comes to my desk that I have not seen before, I am 100% certain that it will tell me something about the industry or the way it operates that I did not know. So I quite like it, because until the real zing of being an in-house lawyer is looking at the impact that your advice is going to have and to take a view. And take a view, sometimes not knowing all the facts, obviously not faffing on the law, but knowing about 80% and having the judgment to say that 80% is enough and I'm going to move forward now. I'm going to take a decision because time is of essence, right? Time costs money. And to then make that decision and see it in real time, how it plays out, is, I think, immensely valuable. I have made many decisions that I have then thought that was a mistake. I shouldn't have done it. And I've made many decisions where I thought, absolutely right, well done, pat on the back. So the real-time learning that you get, it really clarifies in your mind the risk-taking ability that you have as a business, as a professional, and as an industry. So I think unless you understand the context in which you operate, you're not a good lawyer. You can't support the business. And this, I think, is what is necessary, I think, even for law firms when they support in-house counsel like me. If they don't get the context, they cannot help. They can give a view on the law, but it needs then a level of interpretation, somebody to put the two together. So it's not a finished piece of work that you can lift and shift and work with. You have to take that piece, then you have to look at the business. That will raise 10 questions more. Then you go back to this gentleman and say, how does this work? Then they give you a view. No one has that much time in real life. So lawyers need to, not just in-house lawyers, but also law firm lawyers who support clients and industries need to understand how the industry works and how the company functions.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think even today, like you said, when you came back a decade ago, there were more law firms than when you left in the early 2000s. And today in 2020, there's even more law firms out there. I think when we do a lot of work chatting to GCs and the in-house community, and the kind of consistent feedback that comes back is law firms and lawyers do not understand us, and their value proposition to us as business is really under threat, because like you're an example of the radical change that the GC community has seen in the last decade. You actually started earlier than what we see more commonly, where this role has really accelerated in India in the last decade, that GCs have really transformed from a cost function that the business did not take seriously, and especially in the Indian business houses, to very much a core part of the leadership functioning of the business. And feedback that comes back consistently is lawyers in India and law firms have not kept a pace with that change, right? And you would have dealt with many domestic law firms, global law firms over your career to date. What do you think is missing from particularly the Indian law firms? I think global law firms get it and they're way ahead of the game, but what do you think is missing from Indian lawyers today and law firms with regards to working with clients? And what advice would you give them, for essentially, I'm saying, for them to really get up to the mark?
So I'll tell you a small story before I answer the question, Vikas. When I was in London, Diageo did a lot of work with it was a European law firm, but largely UK centric. And interestingly, and to my surprise actually, there were many people in the Diageo legal department who were erstwhile associates and consultants with this law firm. And of course, I until then had a very Indian point of view to this, that, oh my God, you poach talent. And I kept thinking, this law firm, it's really quite calm. They're quite happy to send people on secondment, even knowing the people may get poached, etc. How does this really work? And I remember somebody once sat me down and said, it's an investment for us, because the people that we are sending to you help us develop our understanding of your business and how your function works. And quite often, and actually to this day, it's true, sometimes when you need the history of a particular issue in a company, typically the law firm has it. The in-house guys don't have it, because there's quite a bit of movement and churn. So there were situations where someone would say, call that person from that firm. They advised us on the first transaction. They'll be able to tell you. And you could actually make the narrative come together because of that. And for them, it was very much not just saying, how does this company deal with M&A, for example? For them, it was also sitting with you to understand what's the real life problems that you're facing, that you're supporting the business with. And really, what's the business appetite to take risks? What's going on in the rest of the world for the business? Is this a good time for the business to be taking a chance on X or Y? So there is a wider perspective, I think, that really gives you the ability to give holistic advice. Anyone who says you are great at the law and you will be a great in-house lawyer, I think is taking a slightly narrow-minded view to it. The more broader your context and understanding, the more you see the world around you, the better lawyer you can be in-house. So you need to understand the business strategy. You need to understand what the sales guys do. You need to understand what supply does. You need to understand how the route to market is changing and how the world and the economy is impacting you. You need a bigger understanding. You can't just be a lawyer. That, I think, is the key for law firms as well. You need a bigger understanding of the industry and the forces that dynamically operate with the industry and how it changes and why is it changing. In terms of advice, I think to law firms, I don't think it's advice really, but I'll tell you what I care about and what I look for, I suppose, in working with firms.
Yeah.
I don't like it when people lie at any point. So frankly, when my recommendation would be, you shouldn't come for a pitch and say you've done something when you haven't really, or don't really know too much about it. Because I think typically the people you are making a pitch to are not stupid. I mean, no one is so stupid that they can't see through you when you're lying. So honestly, being honest is the best. The second thing for me, I think, is really a willingness to say, we've not done that before, but we are happy to go and look at it and come back. And that's something I value not just in law firms, but also in people I work with. I don't expect myself or anyone else around me actually to be someone who has all the answers to all the questions, because then you would be God. Human beings don't know many things. And honestly, there is no shame in saying I don't know. In fact, I'm quite proud of saying I don't know when I don't know. It would be shameful to say you knew or to say you did not know and then not learn. So I'm quite happy to say I don't know and then go back and take the effort that it takes, right? So I would like to see law firms do that. And the third thing for me is integrity. I do not appreciate anyone taking a shortcut. It is not my life plan. I do not allow anyone around me to do it, and I do not like it when law firms suggest it either. So those are my three, I guess, suggestions. But there may be other clients out there who are not as I don't know, black and white and stubborn as I am. So maybe other things work for them, but this works for me.
Is that part of your DNA, or like is that part of the kind of training you received, through your career?
No, I think that is part of my DNA. I'm very early in my career, and I won't go into details, but not even career. Actually, my first job interview, I failed spectacularly because somebody said you're too black and white. And since then, actually, even in Diageo, the feedback that I receive, and I receive feedback regularly, and I am actually very open to feedback. I don't accept everything I'm told, but I'm very open to hear it. And everything that I'm told all the time is I am very black and white, and I don't necessarily feel the comfort to operate in the gray. And there is some truth to it. I think there is some truth to it. I have a pretty clear world vision of what I think is okay to do. I'm open to hearing a different point of view. And if I've got something wrong, I'm happy to change my mind. But if I think something is not okay to do, it is very hard to make me do it. And that is which is not great.
Well, luckily you're in the world of alcohol, because cocktails and alcohol helps you get into the world of grey.
I suppose. Get in the right milieu to be a bit more tractable.
Yeah.
I was also going to say, luckily, Mamta thought that it was okay to do Unsuited as well. So luckily for us, you thought that was an okay.
No, I regretted it immediately. Immediately, trust me. I immediately thought, why did I say that?
We're so glad that you believe in keeping the commitments you make.
And the universe is taking care of you now. So it's okay.
Inshallah.
So we want to move on to, again, another big question around diversity, because, much is said about diversity, and especially the lack of.
Much is said, but not done about diversity.
Yeah, and that's throughout corporates. Well, forget corporates, pretty much most of life. So whether it's corporates, politics, religion, etc. And especially, the legal profession is no different there. And you've been, you've enjoyed, a very successful career, already, in the last 17 plus years, in law, and you were very early to move into kind of a leadership role as well. And you're now in an industry, for the last decade that is very male dominated and associated, as a kind of male segment. Right? That could not have been an easy journey, that you've had from, joining JSA at the beginning to the last decade at Diageo. And there must have been, many times you, kind of bumped against that colloquial, glass ceiling, and had many instances that kind of really questioned, your kind of, what was going on here. How have you managed to navigate that, so successfully, especially from the different industries you've worked in, different countries and cities you've worked in?
So it's an interesting question, because I think when I was in JSA, if I think about, I guess, JSA, BT, Diageo, when I was in JSA as well as BT as well as Diageo, I think I never thought of myself as a woman first. I thought of myself as a professional first. And every experience I had, therefore, I attributed to my actions as a professional rather than my personality or my gender. So maybe somebody was discriminating against me. Frankly, I don't know. I did not take that interpretation. I took the view that when I did well, I was recognized for it. And when I made a mistake, I was called on it. And for the most part, I think that was true. I remember thinking one thing very clearly, which was that I think for law firms, at the time, there was this whole sexual harassment thing was quite new. Vishankha hadn't happened, etc. And I remember thinking at that time that if you're a junior associate and you're going to a meeting with a client and the client is being inappropriate, you may feel hamstrung and powerless to do anything about it. It has happened to me on occasion. And I remember at the time saying in GSA, we need to do something about that and take action. I think they did do it. I left, of course, I was not there long enough to see it. But they did do something about it. So I think for me, it was more how your experience is when you go to a third party organization rather than the one you're in. are shaped by the fact that you're a woman. And I had another example when I was in PT, and this man I could have killed if I had the opportunity. We were negotiating with someone in India, actually, on the phone. And I remember I was the lawyer supporting the negotiation, and there was a business guy sitting next to me, a good friend of mine, Australian. And I said something, and that gentleman at the other end, who was a lawyer, responded saying, "No, my dear." And I thought I did not hear right. So I put myself on mute, and I turned around and I said, "Mark, did he just call me my dear?" And Mark, who obviously knew me very well, said, "Just calm down. Calm down. Just let it go." I was like, "Excuse me."
Calm down, dear.
Let it be said that I blew up. I was not very polite and choiceful in my words, but I did blow up. I am hopefully a bit more mature now and can handle it a bit better. But just makes me see red anyway. So I didn't really realize that alcohol is so male-dominated until I guess came into the USL sphere. Because when I was in Diageo India, actually we were quite a small business, but we were a very multinational business. So it was quite representative, I suppose, of the multinational culture and values. It's when I started doing my work in the integration between USL and Diageo that I started to realize that the domestic alcohol companies were quite male-dominated, and the perception of alcohol, of the industry, all of it kind of came together to make it a very seedy and unseemly sort of career choice. And I remember thinking that is a little weird. And for the first time since then, I started to register when I was in meetings to see how many women are around me. I mean, it didn't stop me from saying what I wanted to say or being who I wanted to be or even wearing what I wanted to wear. But it was always top of mind to say, I'm the only woman in this room again. And again, I'm the only woman in this room. And this is now getting really annoying. So, I mean, we're much better off now. But that was the experience at that point. I think really life is changing quite a bit for alcohol. I will say this, right? So over the last 5 years or so, I think willy-nilly the alcohol industry is being pulled into the 21st century, may I say. So, and I think at 3 different levels. So the first thing is this whole association of the industry being quite non-compliant. And anyone who works there is like someone who likes taking shortcuts and doing underhand deals. But that's changed in the last 5 years. I think really most of the companies' compliance is something that they do by choice. And I think that makes it easier for talent to approach the industry and to break through, because people, I mean, youngsters today, they don't want to work in a company like that. Life's too short for them. They're not interested in all this crap. The millennials, wow, they're quite cool. And there's quite a bit to learn from them. Then the second part is really the alcohol itself, the product. Right? Many people in India enjoy the product, but for some reason, it's not something that sees the light of day and that you talk about proudly or happily or just accept it as a part of life and as a part of celebration, right? Instead, it's something that you do in a corner, behind a curtain, don't talk to anybody about it and do too much. So there is something also about changing the perception of alcohol, talking about moderation, that it has a place in society and in celebration, in life, if done in moderation, that actually it is done with seemingly everyday activities like hanging out with your friends, eating your food. So it becomes a lot more normalized in the way that it's seen and approached. So I think that helps. And the third part is really changing the diversity makeup within the industry. If I'm honest, we are still at a very nascent stage and we are still only talking about gender diversity, but diversity has 100 variables, as we know. So we've started the journey on that, and I'm happy to say Diageo is quite ahead on it now. But the real key, I think, to diversity and to making diversity sustainable is inclusion. You can bring different types of people into an organization. You can, for example, just give them a lot of money and maybe they will come, right? But unless you give them an experience that they enjoy or where they feel valued for their difference or despite their difference, they will not stay. So I think more than diversity, the conversation is inclusion. And in an inclusive environment, if you probably did not make an effort also, it would automatically become diverse. Now that is utopia. So until we get there, we have to work on the diversity and the numbers. You've got to set yourself a target or make sure you get to that target, because anything that doesn't get measured usually doesn't get delivered. So both kind of have to go hand in hand. So my experience, I think I've been lucky, universe looking out for dumb people, because, but I think there are different types of stereotypes that everyone has in their mind. And it's really, a stereotype is a way to organize data in your head when you have too much data, right? So there's nothing wrong with the stereotype, but the value you start to associate it with is the problem. So for example, the fact that you may not be very old sometimes is held against you, that you're very young. What do you know, right? Or maybe you can't do this job. Or, the personality doesn't have the kind of maturity or seriousness that is expected from a lawyer. And most people tell me that I'm very unlike a lawyer because I just have a lot of inane jokes. I laugh a lot and I have a lot of energy, I suppose. Doesn't make me a bad lawyer. It doesn't make me a great one, but it certainly doesn't make me a bad one. So it is what it is. It's like the color of my hair. You got to live with it. I got to live with it, and so do you, I suppose. So there are different types of things that you feel, I think. Yeah.